My name is David Meyer. I'm a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under Higgin and Jean-Jacques Machado and the Machado brothers. I was one of the first Americans to receive a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I have been training in other styles of Jiu-Jitsu since I was a small child, beginning with under a man named Jack Secchi, and also have trained Kung Fu for many years with Douglas Wong in Los Angeles. Most of my training was in Los Angeles, but in 2004 I moved up to San Francisco, and I'm currently training with the Cesar Gracie team in San Francisco with a lot of NHB fighters, including Jake Shields and Gil Menendez, some really great guys. My profession during the day is I run North America's largest pet adoption website called 1-800-SAVE-A-PET.com that helps animals get adopted, homeless animals. I'm a big animal lover and animal rights person and vegetarian, and I think it's very important for my martial arts training as well. I think that really helps my endurance and my general health. I first got involved in the martial arts when I was just 6 years old. I have a brother who's 3 years older than I am. And my parents wanted to enroll him in some sort of a martial arts self-defense program, so naturally it was easy to put us both in the same program. And we lived in Los Angeles, and we went to a place called Valley College, where a cousin of ours was already a black belt under a man named Jack Secchi. And so we enrolled, and I just really came along for the ride, but I feel very lucky that I did that because I ended up staying with it through my whole life in various forms. I think it's been a great asset in my life. I look forward to continuing to train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which I just think is a very fun sport, and in mixed martial arts, which is where all the guys I'm training with are either currently involved professionally or want to get involved professionally. It's been a little bit difficult because I've had some nagging injuries that may require me to tone down my training a bit and have kept me from competing, which is something I really, really like. I really enjoy kickboxing to the extent that that's functional for actual fighting, not so much as a sport. And I feel very, very lucky to be exposed to people like John Will and Richard Norton, who are really great stand-up fighters, so I feel like for very little effort I can get some really great instruction that way. And that's basically it. I like doing what I'm doing, and I hope to keep doing that into the future. I actually have produced with John Will a grappling curriculum, which is something we sell for martial arts schools, and I'm hopeful that in the next few years that will continue to grow and catch on, and that might lead to some bigger things that, you know, open up more possibilities for travel and training. Obviously, I have a lifetime of memories in the martial arts. When I look back, ones that particularly stand out, of course, my competitions in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, those have been highlights for me, both the wins and the losses. The wins are obviously fun, but the losses are the things that you learn from. I enjoyed going to the World Championship in 1998 in Brazil, and I was actually the first American to win a medal in World Championship competition at a black belt level in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so that was pretty exciting and fun. I remember my first black belt match in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which was in front of a lot of people in an arena in Irvine, and I actually lost that in the last few moments of that fight to a sweep, but it really made me realize that I actually could hang with Brazilians, which was something that all of us who were very new to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu just couldn't get through our heads, because our coaches were the Machado brothers. They were just so amazingly good. We naturally assumed that all Brazilian black belts were at that level, and so it was very hard for us to get confidence to think that we could ever beat anyone who was Brazilian in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but that was exciting to realize that that was a possibility. I actually also have a memory from when I was a kid that really stuck with me. My first instructor, Jack Secchi, was a half Japanese, half American guy who I believe grew up in Japan and lived in the United States, and he was one of these really old school jiu-jitsu instructors, very tough, very stoic, never missed a class. The only time I ever remember him being late to a class, he came hobbling in maybe 20 minutes late and was very apologetic for being late. He'd actually stepped on a nail and it had gone through his foot. And he was bleeding, so it slowed his walking to the class, and he finished the class, and then we took him to the emergency room. But I remember one time, and this was when I was a kid, that we put on a demonstration for the parents. All came to Valley College, and Sensei Seki was going to demonstrate board breaking, which was not something we did in our style, but it was something he knew how to do, and it was just very impressive to us. And I remember them taking these 1-inch thick pine boards, each of which was really very hard to break in and of its own. And I think he taped maybe 4 or 5 of them together, and they put masking tape around the edge and masking tape around the edge, and he did one break with his hand and one break with his foot. And then they taped 5 together, and they put masking tape around the edge, around the middle, and around the edge, and he was going to do a break with his head. And it was sort of the finale of this whole demonstration we put on for all the parents. And he gathered his energy, and he looked real serious, and he had, I don't know if it was 1 or 2 black belts, holding it really solid, and he slammed his head against it, and it didn't break. And he looked a little puzzled, and so he focused his energy again, and he slammed his head against it again, and it still didn't break, and this time he was bleeding from his forehead. He'd cut himself. So he looked puzzled again, so he did it one more time. He slammed his head against it, and it didn't break. And then he just kind of smiled and looked to everyone and said, you can't win them all. And everybody clapped and appreciated it and started to go home, and we started to clean up the mats and sweep up from the broken boards. And then after everybody had gone, somebody took, as we were throwing things away, they took the masking tape off of the middle of the board. See, someone had taped the center of the board. Well, it turns out the boards had broken, but the masking tape didn't tear, so it was holding it together. And when they took the masking tape off, all this sawdust just came pouring out. I mean, he had obliterated these boards, but it was only just because nothing was sharp enough to cut the tape. And that really just made an impression on me about how powerful it was and how graceful he was about, and just smiling that it didn't break, when in fact nobody knew this, but it broke. He just obliterated, turned them to sawdust, and that just kind of impressed me about Sensei Seki. I think I'd have to say my advice for martial artists, and this may sound tacky, but I'll explain it, is set your ego aside. We say the Machado schools, leave your ego at the door. But I really, really sincerely mean that. If you want to get good in martial arts, you have to be able to set your ego aside. Doesn't mean have no ego. If you don't have any ego, if you don't care about winning or care about excelling or being the best you can be, then you're not motivated to step onto the mat and train hard. So it's not about having no caring about whether you win or lose or get better. But what I mean by that is the only way you can ever get better is by exposing yourself to the possibility of failure. It's just the only way. If you're never failing or never losing, then you're not training with people who are good enough, who essentially are better than you. And I think to whatever extent I've gotten good, and I actually don't feel that I'm that good, but however good I have gotten, it's been because I've had this absolute willingness to try new things, to leave one style of jiu-jitsu, to start Brazilian jiu-jitsu, to train with anybody at any time in any art, to compete every chance I get if I'm physically able to, and to just be willing to lose. It's not fun to lose. It's not fun to be made to tap by somebody who's maybe not at your belt level. But I just sort of shrug and say, if somebody can beat me, it's because they're better than me, and that's not my fault. They've shake their hand. They've obviously been training harder than I have, or they're more talented than I am. It's not a reflection on me. And the only way you can get better is to expose yourself to things that you're not good at. So if you can just set your ego aside, whatever it is you're going to do, and just trust in your heart that every time you lose and every time you expose yourself to failure, whether it's just in your own school or in a big, huge arena in front of a lot of people, you will ultimately be better for the experience. And in the end, you will be an incredibly good martial artist who's had a lot of experiences, who knows how not to lose, who's just been there, done that, and the only way you can get there is to expose yourself to the possibility of failure. So you just got to embrace that and move forward. So leave your ego at the door if you want to get good. my role models, certainly in the martial arts, would have been first, sort of in chronological order, my original martial arts instructor, Jack Secchi, who instilled in me, I want to say, a sense of fear, because he was that kind of a very authoritarian teacher, but then he always had this twinkle in his eye. If he said something really loudly or sternly or punished you for doing something wrong on the mat, you always had this sense that there was a kind of a glimmer in the back of his eye that he actually really cared about you, and the truth was no one would be there for you more strongly than he would be there for you. He once told me that when people get scared or something bad is happening, they hope someone is going to come and save them, so they call the police or whatever, that you have to be the person that's going to come and save them. You are the person that they're hoping will be there, saying that to me, to try to instill to me why I'm training in the martial arts. And he sort of added on to that, if you are in need of help, you are the help you need. There's no one who's going to show up who's going to be any more capable than you to handle taking care of yourself, so be that person. When you walk into a room, everyone in the room is safer because you're in that room. They don't have to know it, but they just are. And that made a big impression on me. And of course, my instructors, Higan Machado and John-Jacques Machado and the Machado brothers, they've been certainly role models for me in terms of their willingness to give and their absolute love of their sport and their proficiency at it. They've been great friends. John Will is someone who is a business partner of mine. He's the first black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to be an Australian. So he's the first Australian-born black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He is someone who actually taught me my first lesson in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which was an interesting thing. We became immediate friends. He is one of my strongest role models because I've never met anyone who was so, just first of all, a great fighter in all forms, stand-up fighting, ground fighting, just a brilliantly excellent martial artist. But someone who is so smart, the way he analyzes techniques, the way he looks at something, really puts in the effort to understand it and make it his own, and then teach it. He's just really inspirational that way. And I think maybe some of that comes from the fact that he lives in Australia, so when he would come and train in the United States, he didn't have the luxury of knowing that if he didn't pick up the technique, he could always just ask, next week or next month. He really had to pay attention and understand the principles behind the techniques and essentially teach himself. So as someone who has discipline in the martial arts and who truly is a brilliant, brilliant coach and fighter, he's always someone I look up to and really inspires me. Professor Wally J., who's a good friend of mine, I find also very inspirational, both because he's training for so many years into really his old age, but also just his whole openness about the martial arts and willingness to get ostracized from people who thought that he was, changing their art when the master wouldn't like that, but his always interest in learning something new, figuring out the new principles behind it, and willingness to try new things. And then my role models in life in general, of course, are just my parents, for their absolute acceptance of everything I do, which I think is really, really important. And I think that would be it. Those would be my main role models in life. I don't know who's going to be watching this or when you're watching this. I assume you're a martial artist. I wish you the best of luck in your training. Whatever is the style that you're doing, I hope that you're clear on what your goals are. If your goals are fighting or self-defense, I hope that you're training in a system that really emphasizes that in a very honest way. There's so much to the martial arts. There's self-defense, there's the art of it, there's health, there's fitness. But you really get good at what you practice, and that's something that I think that you should remember. So, swimmers get good at swimming, and it's because they practice swimming. Now, that might also help them when they're, fighting, because they have strong arms or something. But basically, you get good at what you practice. So if you want to be good at self-defense, street situations, you actually have to practice that. You have to practice in a situation that deals with the reality of that and the adrenal stress and makes that a reality. If you want to get good at a sport, practice that sport. So I just say, understand clearly what your actual goals are, and then be sure that you're training honestly about them and not kidding yourself. And I wish you good luck in meeting those goals. And in training safely, we say that injury is the enemy. Losing is learning. that's fine. But getting injured, anything that stops you from training, that's bad. So injury is the enemy. I'm very passionate about my life, about my martial arts training, which is one of my main passions. And my other passion is animals and the treatment of animals. It's just something very important to me. I feel like animals can't speak for themselves, and they're just so straight up, so honest, and yet we kill them for food and force them to be in circuses and in zoos for entertainment and wear them, and I just don't believe in any of that. I feel that it makes me a much stronger person to think things through in my life, to think what my moral values are, and then try to actually live them and make them actual in my living. I think that makes me a stronger fighter and a stronger person in general. I actually think the fact that I'm a vegetarian, it really helps my endurance. I don't have any clogging of the arteries, so I think that actually helps my athletic performance too. And environmentally, it's important to me too. I tell people the single best thing you can do for the environment is stop eating meat, because of the tremendous resources that are used to create cattle and factory farms and things like that. But I don't really preach that, but seeing this as an opportunity to share that belief, I'd like to share that. I also have a product that John Will and I created, the Masterclass Grappling Curriculum, and we'll be creating other products as well, and that's available on a website called grappling.us. So it's www.grappling.us, and we have products there. People can buy our curriculum. They can have a step-by-step ordered way of learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I'm sure we're going to be adding other curriculums to that as well. And it gives people who have a school that want to bring grappling into their school a chance to do that, and it gives fighters who maybe don't have access to instructors, or do but just want to really enhance their training, some tools that they can do that too. So I hope you'll check that out. We also have belt ranking programs for people who don't have access to instructors. So check out grappling.us. And back to the animals, I also mentioned that I run North America's largest pet adoption website, non-profit pet adoption website, and that's called 1-800-SaveAPet.com. So if you're ever thinking of getting a dog or a cat or some animal, don't go to a pet store or a breeder. There's animals that need homes right now, and you can find them on the web at 1-800-SaveAPet.com. That's my commercial.